The morning of my wedding day smelled like dying roses and desperation. I stood before the mirror in my childhood bedroom, watching my mother's trembling hands adjust the veil over my pale blonde hair for the third time. The fabric felt like a burial shroud. Outside, I could hear the village gathering, laughter, music, the clatter of preparations for a celebration I wanted no part of. My betrothed, Edmund Thorne, was the son of our village elder, a man twice my age with eyes that never smiled and hands that had left bruises on his first wife before she died in childbirth. "You look beautiful, Marin," my mother whispered, but her voice cracked on my name. I met her gaze in the mirror's reflection. We both knew what this was, not a wedding, but a transaction. My father owed debts to the Thorne family, debts that had accumulated over years of bad harvests and worse decisions. I was 22 years old, and I was being sold to settle accounts. The fabric of my dress scratched against my skin, too tight across my ribs. I had deliberately eaten less these past weeks, hoping I might waste away to nothing before this day arrived. It hadn't worked. I was still here, still breathing, still expected to walk down that aisle and promise my life to a man who looked at me like I was property he'd already purchased. "I can't do this," I said quietly. My mother's hand stilled. For a moment, I thought she might agree, might help me flee through the back door and into the forest, but then her fingers resumed their fussing with the veil, and she said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. The sound of wagon wheels on cobblestones drifted through the window. I moved to look outside, grateful for any excuse to turn away from that mirror. The village square was transforming into a festival ground, but what caught my attention was the convoy passing through. 3 massive wagons pulled by horses that looked like they'd been carved from midnight itself. They were unlike anything I'd seen in our small village. "Who are they?" I asked. My mother joined me at the window, and I felt her body stiffen. "Travelers passing through. Don't stare, Marin. It's not proper, especially today." But I couldn't look away. The wagons were ornate, draped in deep indigo cloth embroidered with silver thread that caught the morning light. Guards flanked them on horseback, their uniforms bearing a crest I didn't recognize, a wolf's head surrounded by a crown of thorns. There was something wild about them, something dangerous that made the village folk step back and avert their eyes as they passed. "They're going north," my mother said nervously. "The Alpha King's procession. They say he's returning from the southern territories. The Alpha King." I'd heard stories, of course, everyone had. He ruled the northern wilderness, a territory so vast and untamed that even our kingdom's sovereign didn't challenge his authority there. They said he was more beast than man, that he could tear a person apart with his bare hands, that his court was filled with creatures who walked the line between human and something else entirely. They also said he took no wife, trusted no one, and answered to nothing except his own savage law. An idea bloomed in my mind, wild and reckless. "I need a moment alone," I said. "To pray." My mother hesitated, then nodded. "Don't be long. The ceremony starts within the hour." She kissed my forehead, and I felt the dampness of her tears against my skin before she left, closing the door softly behind her. I didn't waste time. I tore off the veil, stripped away the wedding dress until I stood in just my plain cotton shift. From my wardrobe, I pulled out the oldest, most forgettable clothes I owned, a dark gray dress, a wool cloak, worn boots. I braided my hair quickly, pinning it tight against my head before covering it with the cloak's hood. My hands were shaking as I opened my window. The wedding gifts were displayed in the room next door, and among them were items from distant relatives, including a trunk that hadn't yet been unpacked. I climbed through, moving with the careful silence of someone who'd spent years trying to be invisible in her own home. The trunk contained traveling clothes from my aunt in the eastern provinces. I took a leather satchel, filled it with a few essentials, dried meat, a water skin, the small amount of coin I'd been saving for years. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst through. From the window I could see the procession had stopped. The Alpha King's wagons were being inspected at the village boundary. A formality, since no one would dare truly search them, but it meant they were stationary, and the third wagon's rear canvas flap was loosely tied. This was insanity. This would get me killed, but staying would kill me slower. I climbed down the trellis outside my window, the same path I'd used as a child when I wanted to escape my father's drunken rages. My boots hit the ground softly, and I pressed myself against the house's stone wall, breathing hard. The celebration was on the opposite side of the building. If I moved quickly, if luck was with me for once in my cursed life, I ran. Not toward the forest, where they'd search first, but toward the wagons, toward the dangerous unknown that somehow felt safer than the certain horror waiting for me in that church. I kept my head down, my cloak wrapped tight. To anyone glancing my way, I'd look like a servant running an errand, nothing worth noticing. The guards were distracted, arguing with the village boundary keeper about some tax or toll. I slipped behind the third wagon, my heart in my throat. The canvas flap was right there. I could hear voices inside, smell incense and something else. Pine and smoke, and something distinctly animal. God forgive me, I thought, and then I climbed inside. The interior was dimmer than I expected, my eyes taking a moment to adjust. The wagon was larger than it appeared from outside, packed with trunks and crates, furs and weapons. I crawled behind a stack of supply crates near the back, wedging myself into a space barely large enough for my body. I pulled a heavy fur over myself, trying to control my breathing, trying to become invisible. The wagon lurched forward. We were moving. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle any sound, my body shaking with a mixture of terror and relief. Behind me, my old life was receding. The wedding that wouldn't happen, the man I wouldn't marry, the mother who couldn't save me. Ahead was uncertainty, danger, possibly death. But it was a death I was choosing. The wagon rolled on, and I lost track of time in that dark space. My body cramped, my legs going numb from the awkward position. I could hear voices occasionally, the guards calling to each other, the drivers urging the horses onward. The sound of the village faded, replaced by the creak of wheels and the whisper of wind through trees. Hours passed. Maybe 3, maybe 5. The light filtering through gaps in the canvas changed from morning gold to afternoon white. My water skin was already half empty, and I rationed each sip, knowing I couldn't predict when I'd have access to more. The wagon hit a particularly rough patch of road, and one of the crates shifted, nearly crushing my hiding spot. I bit down on my lip to keep from crying out, tasting copper. The fur slipped slightly, and I scrambled to pull it back, my heart racing. "Easy there!" someone shouted from outside. We slowed, then stopped. I froze, barely breathing. Had they heard something? Seen something? I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, praying to gods I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. The canvas flap was suddenly torn open. Light flooded in, blinding after hours in dimness. I squeezed my eyes shut, then forced them open, blinking away tears. A figure stood silhouetted in the opening, broad-shouldered and imposing. As my vision cleared, I saw him fully. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair that fell just past his shoulders, and eyes that seemed to shift color in the light, from amber to something almost silver. His face was sharp angles and hard lines, handsome in a way that felt dangerous, like admiring a blade before it cuts you. He wore black leather and dark furs, and there was a quality to his stillness that reminded me of a predator deciding whether to strike. Those shifting eyes locked onto my hiding spot with unnerving precision. "Come out," he said. His voice was low, controlled, but there was something beneath it that made every instinct scream at me to obey. "Now." I didn't move. Couldn't move. Fear had turned my muscles to stone. He tilted his head slightly, studying the space where I hid. "I can smell your fear from here. You have 3 seconds to show yourself before I drag you out, and I promise you won't enjoy my methods." Smell my fear? My hands shook as I pushed aside the fur. I crawled forward on trembling limbs, my cloak catching on the crates. When I emerged into the light, I kept my head down, unable to meet his gaze. "Look at me." I forced my eyes up. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered across his features. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. He studied me with an intensity that made me feel transparent, like he could see every secret I'd ever kept. "How long have you been in my wagon?" he asked. Since the village. This morning. That was 6 hours ago. You've been hiding back there for 6 hours?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He was silent for a long moment, and I realized that the entire procession had stopped. Guards were gathering, their hands on their weapons. I could hear urgent whispers, sense the tension rolling off them in waves. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he asked. "The Alpha King," I whispered. "And yet you climbed into my wagon uninvited. You're either remarkably brave or catastrophically stupid." He leaned against the wagon's frame, arms crossed. "Which is it?" "Desperate," I said, and was horrified to hear my voice crack. I was desperate. Something in his expression shifted, softened almost imperceptibly. Desperate enough to hide among predators who could tear you apart before you had time to scream? I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze with what little courage I had left. The predator I was running from wore a human face and had a marriage license. Your kind of danger seemed preferable. A small, dark smile curved his lips. Did it now? He studied me for another long moment, then turned to address someone outside. "We camp here for the night. No one approaches this wagon without my direct permission." He looked back at me, those strange eyes unreadable. "You and I are going to have a very long conversation about what happens to stowaways in my territory." The canvas flap fell closed, sealing me in dimness once again. But this time I wasn't alone. The Alpha King remained inside, and the small space suddenly felt impossibly intimate. "What's your name?" he asked. "Marin." "Well, Marin," he said, settling onto one of the crates with an easy grace that belied his size. "You've made an interesting choice today. Now let's see if you survive it." The Alpha King didn't speak for several minutes after the canvas fell closed. He simply watched me with those unsettling eyes that seemed to catch and hold every scrap of light in the dim wagon. I remained near the entrance, my body coiled tight with the instinct to flee, though there was nowhere to go. Outside, I could hear his guards setting up camp, the sound of tents being raised, fires being started, low voices conducting the business of making temporary shelter. "Sit," he finally said, gesturing to a crate opposite him. I hesitated, then obeyed. My legs were grateful for the reprieve after hours of cramped hiding. As I settled onto the wooden surface, I kept my eyes downcast, studying the intricate patterns woven into the rug beneath our feet. It was finer than anything in our village, deep red with gold thread forming symbols I didn't recognize. "You're not what I expected to find," he said. "What did you expect? A spy, perhaps, an assassin, someone sent by the southern lords to gather intelligence or attempt something foolish." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Instead, I find a girl running from a wedding. It's almost disappointingly mundane." The dismissal in his tone sparked something hot in my chest. "I'm sorry my suffering isn't exotic enough for you." His eyebrows rose slightly. "There's some fire under all that fear. Good. You'll need it." He reached behind him and produced a water skin, tossing it to me. "Drink. You look half dead." I caught it clumsily, my hands still shaking from adrenaline. The water was cold and clean, better than anything from our village well. I drank deeply, not realizing how parched I'd become until the liquid hit my throat. "Slowly," he warned. "You'll make yourself sick." I lowered the skin, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "Are you going to kill me? That depends entirely on your answers to my questions." He studied me with that predatory focus. "This man you were meant to marry, tell me about him. Why does it matter? Humor me." I swallowed hard, the water suddenly sitting heavy in my stomach. "Edmund Thorne, 43 years old. His first wife died 3 years ago, and he's been looking for a replacement ever since. My father owed his family money, and I was the payment they agreed upon." "How much money?" "Does it matter?" "Everything matters. How much?" 300 silver marks. Something dark flickered across his features. "They sold you for 300 marks? That's barely enough to buy a decent horse." The casual cruelty of the comparison shouldn't have stung, but it did. I looked away, blinking back the heat behind my eyes. "I'm aware of my value, Your Majesty." "I doubt that very much." He stood, unfolding to his full height, and the wagon suddenly felt impossibly small. He moved to one of the trunks, opening it to reveal neat stacks of clothing and supplies. "You're malnourished, exhausted, and clearly haven't been properly cared for in some time. That doesn't indicate your value, it indicates their blindness. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I said nothing. He pulled out what looked like dried meat and hard bread, wrapped in cloth. When did you last eat? Yesterday morning. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. You hid in a wagon for 6 hours, running from a forced marriage, and you didn't think to bring adequate supplies? I brought what I could grab in 5 minutes. He handed me the food. Eat. And while you do, explain to me what you thought would happen when you reached wherever it is you imagined this wagon was going. I took the food, my stomach growling at the mere sight of it. The meat was venison, seasoned with herbs I couldn't name. I forced myself to eat slowly, though I wanted to devour it like an animal. I didn't think that far ahead, clearly. I just knew I couldn't marry him. I couldn't. My voice caught, and I had to stop, focusing on chewing, on breathing, on anything except the memory of Edmund's cold eyes assessing me like livestock. His first wife had bruises. Everyone knew, but no one said anything. And after she died, after the midwife came out of that room with blood on her hands and a dead infant, Edmund barely waited a month before looking for his next victim. The Alpha King returned to his seat, watching me with an intensity that should have felt threatening, but somehow didn't. So you chose possible death in a stranger's wagon over certain misery in a known monster's home. Yes. That took courage. I laughed, a bitter sound. It took terror. There's a difference. Is there? He tilted his head. Most people freeze when terrified. They let fear make them passive. You acted. That's courage, even if you don't recognize it. Outside, someone called his name. Darius. And he responded with a short, commanding reply in a language I didn't understand. Darius. The Alpha King had a name, and somehow knowing it made him feel both more and less dangerous. Your guards are looking for you, I said. They can wait. We're not finished. He leaned back, his posture deceptively relaxed. Here's your situation, Marin. You're 6 hours from your village, well into territory that your people consider wilderness. You have no supplies, no plan, and no protection. If I put you out of this wagon right now, you'd be dead before morning. If the cold didn't get you, the wolves would. And I'm not speaking metaphorically. My chest tightened. So you are going to kill me. I'm explaining reality. Whether you survive it is up to you. He studied me for a long moment. I'm traveling north to my court. It's another week's journey through increasingly hostile terrain. You can come with us, but you'll work for your passage. My people don't carry dead weight. Work how? We'll determine that. Can you cook? Adequately. Tend wounds? I've done some healing work, yes. My mother taught me herbs and basic treatment. His eyes sharpened with interest. That's useful. My men are warriors. They're constantly injured and notoriously bad at caring for themselves. He stood again, moving to the wagon's entrance. You'll ride in this wagon during travel and assist my camp healer in the evenings. In exchange, you'll have protection, food, and safe passage to the Northern Territories. Once we reach the court, we'll discuss more permanent arrangements. What kind of arrangements? He pulled back the canvas slightly, letting in the orange light of early evening. That depends on whether you prove useful. I don't keep useless things, Marin, but I don't discard valuable ones either. Show me you're worth the resources I'm expending, and we'll find a place for you. It wasn't freedom, but it was survival, and survival was more than I'd had this morning. I accept, I said quietly. Good. Stay here. I'll send someone with proper supplies and clothing. Those rags you're wearing won't survive the northern cold. He paused at the entrance, looking back at me. And Marin, don't make me regret this decision. I have a reputation for cruelty to maintain, and I'd hate to prove it accurate with you. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the dim wagon with a half-eaten meal and a strange feeling in my chest that might have been hope, or might have been the first stirrings of a different kind of fear entirely. True to his word, someone arrived within minutes, a woman with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp, knowing eyes. She carried bundles of clothing and moved with the confident efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. I'm Vera, she said without preamble, The king says you're to travel with us and assist me with healing work. Is that accurate? Yes. She looked me up and down with an assessing gaze that reminded me uncomfortably of being livestock at market. You're small and too thin. Have you actually done healing work? Or was that an exaggeration to save your skin? I've treated wounds, set bones, delivered 2 babies, and helped my mother prepare medicines for everything from fever to poisoning. I'm not a master healer, but I'm not useless. A small smile tugged at her lips. Good, I don't have patience for liars or fools. She tossed the clothing bundles to me. Change into these. We'll be moving before dawn, and you'll need to be ready to work immediately once we make camp tomorrow night. 2 of the guards were injured in a skirmish 3 days ago and need their dressings changed. What kind of injuries? Claw marks. Deep ones. I must have looked alarmed because she laughed. A dry sound. Welcome to the Alpha King's Court, girl. You wanted to escape your village? Congratulations. You've succeeded spectacularly. She left me then, and I changed quickly into the clothes she'd brought. Thick wool pants, a sturdy linen shirt, a leather vest that fit surprisingly well, and a heavy cloak lined with fur. Everything was dark, browns and blacks and deep grays, the colors of shadow and forest. When I caught my reflection in the polished surface of a metal trunk, I barely recognized myself. I looked like I belonged here, among these dangerous people traveling through dangerous lands. The thought should have terrified me more than it did. That night, I lay on a bedroll Vera had provided, listening to the sounds of the camp settling. Men's voices carried through the canvas, speaking in that same unfamiliar language Darius had used. Occasionally, I heard something else. Sounds that were almost like words, but not quite. Something between human speech and animal communication. I thought about my mother discovering my empty room, about the wedding ceremony that would never happen, about Edmund's rage when he learned his purchased bride had fled. There would be consequences for my family, I knew. My father's debts would still exist, perhaps grow with interest and insult added. Guilt tried to claw its way up my throat, but I pushed it down. I had spent 22 years being the good daughter, the obedient one, the girl who stayed quiet and caused no trouble. I had made myself small and invisible, hoping that if I took up little enough space, I might be overlooked, might be safe. It hadn't worked. So now I would try something different. I would be the girl who ran, who took reckless chances, who climbed into a predator's wagon and gambled with her life because the alternative was worse than death. As I drifted toward sleep, I heard footsteps outside the wagon. Heavy, measured, the tread of someone who moved with absolute confidence. They paused near my canvas shelter, and I held my breath, wondering if Darius had returned to reconsider his decision. But the footsteps moved on, and I released that held breath slowly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A week of travel through hostile territory, working among people who were clearly something more than human, proving myself valuable enough to keep alive. And at the end of it, a court in the northern wilderness where I would have to forge some kind of life from nothing. It was terrifying. It was also the first choice I'd ever truly made for myself. I fell asleep with that thought warming me more than the fur-lined cloak, more than the small fire I could see glowing through gaps in the canvas. For the first time in years, I had chosen my own path, even if I had no idea where it led. Even if it led to my death, at least it would be a death of my own making. Dawn came cold and gray, seeping through the canvas like an unwelcome guest. I woke to the sounds of camp breaking down around me. Tents collapsing, horses being readied, men's voices calling instructions in that strange, fluid language that seemed to shift between human and something else. My body ached from sleeping on the hard wagon floor, and for a disorienting moment, I forgot where I was. Then memory crashed back. The wedding I'd fled, the wagon I'd hidden in, the Alpha King who'd discovered me. Darius. I dressed quickly in the clothes Vera had provided, braiding my pale hair with fingers that trembled slightly from cold rather than fear. Outside, the morning air bit at my skin, sharp enough to make my eyes water. We were definitely heading north. The temperature had dropped noticeably even in the few hours we'd traveled yesterday. You're awake. Good. Vera appeared at the wagon's entrance, her silver-streaked hair pulled back severely from her face. Come. We move in 10 minutes, and you need to understand how this works. I followed her out into the organized chaos of the breaking camp. There were perhaps 30 people in total, guards, drivers, what looked like scouts, and a few others whose roles I couldn't immediately determine. What struck me most was how they moved together, a coordinated unit that spoke to years of practice. And there was something else, something I couldn't quite name, a quality to their movements that was too fluid, too precise, almost inhuman in its grace. "You'll ride in the supply wagon during travel," Vera explained, gesturing to the third wagon, my accidental refuge. "Stay out of the way. Don't touch anything that doesn't belong to you. And absolutely do not attempt to leave the wagon while we're moving. The territory we're passing through isn't safe for humans wandering alone." "What makes it unsafe?" She gave me a long look, as if deciding how much truth I could handle. "Everything. The wildlife here is larger and more aggressive than what you're used to. The terrain is unforgiving, and there are others who use these roads, not all of them friendly. Others like you, others like us," she corrected, a slight emphasis on the last word that made the hair on my neck rise. "We're not the only pack that travels these routes, and not all of them honor the King's safe passage agreements." Pack. The word hung in the air between us, confirming what I'd already begun to suspect. "You're wolves," I said quietly. Vera's expression didn't change. "We're many things. Wolves is one of them. Does that frighten you?" I thought about it honestly. Less than marrying Edmund Thorne did. A genuine smile crossed her face, transforming her severe features into something almost warm. "You might survive here after all." She turned, expecting me to follow. "Come. I'll introduce you to the men you'll be treating tonight." She led me to a smaller fire where 2 guards sat, both looking uncomfortable. One was perhaps 25, with auburn hair and a bandage wrapped around his forearm that had seeped through with dried blood. The other was older, maybe 40, with a gash across his shoulder that looked angry and inflamed even through his shirt. "This is Maren," Vera announced. "She'll be assisting me with medical care. Maren, this is Finn." She gestured to the younger one. "And Garrett. They encountered a rival pack 3 days ago. Nothing serious, but the wounds need monitoring." "Nothing serious?" Garrett growled, his voice rough. "The bastard nearly took my arm off. You still have your arm, so it clearly wasn't nearly." Vera's tone was matter of fact. "Maren will change your dressings tonight after we make camp. Until then, try not to bleed on anything important." Finn looked at me with undisguised curiosity. "You're the stowaway? The one who hid in the King's wagon?" Word had traveled fast. I lifted my chin, refusing to show embarrassment. "I am." "That took guts," he said, grinning. "Most humans run from us, not toward us." "I wasn't running toward you. I was running from something worse." Garrett snorted. "Must have been pretty bad." It was. Something in my tone made them both fall silent. Vera gave me an approving nod before gesturing back toward the wagons. "Remember what I said. Stay in the wagon, stay quiet, and we'll talk more tonight." The day's travel was long and monotonous. I sat in the swaying wagon, watching the landscape change through gaps in the canvas. We left behind the gentle hills and cultivated fields near my village, entering true wilderness, dense forest where the trees grew so thick that sunlight barely penetrated, streams that ran quick and cold over dark rocks, mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. Occasionally, I'd hear the guards calling to each other, their voices carrying that strange, almost howl quality. Once, I heard something answer from deep in the forest, a sound that made every instinct scream danger. The wagon didn't slow, and none of the guards seemed concerned, but I found myself pulling the fur-lined cloak tighter around my shoulders. We stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and take a quick meal. I remained in the wagon as instructed, and Vera brought me bread, cheese, and dried fruit. As I ate, I noticed Darius moving through the camp, checking on his people, speaking quietly with various guards. He moved with that same predatory grace I'd noticed yesterday, and people deferred to him instantly, not from fear, but from genuine respect. He didn't look at the wagon where I sat, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. I told myself I was relieved. By the time we made camp that evening, we'd traveled what Vera estimated was another 40 miles north. The temperature had dropped further, and my breath came out in visible puffs. The camp was set up with military efficiency. Fires, tents, a perimeter of guards that rotated in shifts I didn't fully understand. "Bring your supplies," Vera instructed, handing me a leather satchel. "We'll start with Finn. His wound is cleaner." I followed her to the fire where the 2 injured guards waited. Finn rolled up his sleeve without being asked, revealing a set of 4 deep gashes running from his elbow to his wrist. They were starting to heal but still looked painful, the edges pink and slightly swollen. "How did this happen?" I asked, kneeling beside him and opening the satchel. Inside were bandages, various dried herbs, a flask of what smelled like strong alcohol, and clean needles with thread. "Fought a wolf from the Shadowmere pack," Finn said. "They don't like us using the northern routes. Think they own them." "You fought a wolf and only got scratches on your arm?" He grinned. "I'm fast, and lucky. Luck runs out," Vera said dryly. "Stop antagonizing rivals." I cleaned the wounds carefully, using the alcohol despite Finn's sharp intake of breath. The gashes were deep, but clean, showing no signs of infection. I applied a salve Vera provided, something that smelled of pine and mint, and rewrapped the arm with fresh bandages. "You're gentle," Finn observed. "Most healers treat us like we're made of iron. Most of you act like you are," Vera said. Garrett was next, and his wound was more concerning. The gash across his shoulder was deeper than I'd initially thought, and the edges were hot to the touch, showing early signs of infection. I cleaned it thoroughly, ignoring his cursing, and applied more of the salve before wrapping it tightly. "This needs to be watched," I told Vera. "If the inflammation spreads, it'll need lancing. Can you do that?" "If I have to." She nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll check again tomorrow night." As I worked, other guards drifted over, some with minor injuries they'd been ignoring, others simply curious about the human girl who'd joined their procession. I treated scrapes, bruises, a sprained wrist, a burn from carelessly handling a hot pot. They tested me with jokes and casual questions, trying to determine what kind of person I was. I answered honestly and kept working, refusing to be intimidated. As the evening wore on, I noticed Darius standing at the edge of the firelight, watching. He didn't approach, didn't speak, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Those strange eyes reflected the flames, making them look almost inhuman. Amber shot through with silver, the eyes of something wild wearing a human face. "The king's taken an interest," Vera murmured quietly, following my gaze. "What do you mean?" "He doesn't usually allow outsiders to travel with us, especially not humans. You must have impressed him somehow." I climbed into his wagon uninvited. "That's not impressive. It's stupid." "Maybe. Or maybe he saw something in you worth keeping." She began packing up the medical supplies. "You did well tonight. The men will accept you faster now that you've proven useful. Is that how it works here? You're only valued if you're useful?" "That's how it works everywhere, girl. We're just more honest about it." She stood, stretching her back. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be longer. We're entering the mountain passes, and the terrain gets rough." I returned to my wagon, my hands smelling of herbs and alcohol, my mind spinning with everything I'd learned. These people, these wolves in human form, operated on rules I didn't fully understand yet. Strength mattered, but so did skill. Loyalty was currency, and respect had to be earned. It was nothing like the village I'd left behind, where your worth was determined by birth and gender and family name. Here, I might actually have a chance. That night, I lay awake longer than I should have, listening to the sounds of the camp settling. Somewhere, someone played a low instrument, something like a flute, but deeper, more mournful. The melody was beautiful and sad, speaking of lost things and long journeys. I thought about my mother, wondered if she was searching for me, or if she'd accepted my disappearance with the same resigned silence she'd shown about the wedding. I thought about Edmund, about his rage, and what he might do to my family in retaliation. But mostly, I thought about Darius, and the way he'd looked at me across the fire. Not with desire or ownership, but with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition, as if he'd seen something in me that even I didn't know was there. The flute music faded, replaced by the night sounds of the forest. Somewhere in the darkness, something howled. a long, lonely sound that was answered by another, then another, until it seemed the whole world was full of wolves calling to each other across the void. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt strangely comforted, as if I'd found myself among my own kind at last, people who understood what it meant to be different, to be dangerous, to live on the edge between civilization and wilderness. As sleep finally claimed me, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to make myself smaller, wasn't trying to disappear or go unnoticed. Here, among wolves and wilderness, I could finally breathe. The mountain passes were as brutal as Vera had warned. For 3 days, we climbed through terrain that seemed determined to kill us. Narrow paths carved into cliffsides, loose rocks that shifted underfoot, winds that howled through the peaks like living things. The temperature dropped so severely that ice formed on the wagons each morning, and my fingers went numb even inside the thick gloves Vera had provided. But I endured. More than endured. I worked. Each evening when we made camp, I helped Vera tend to injuries that accumulated throughout the day. Twisted ankles from unstable ground, cuts from sharp rocks, frostbite on exposed skin. Garrett's shoulder wound improved under my care, the inflammation receding after I'd lanced and drained the infection despite his cursing. The guards began to greet me by name, to save their minor complaints for my attention, to treat me less like an oddity and more like a member of the company, all except Darius, who remained a distant, watchful presence. He checked on his people constantly, made decisions with swift authority, and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his right to lead. But he didn't speak to me again after that first night, and I told myself I didn't care. I was lying. On the 4th day in the mountains, everything changed. We'd stopped for the midday rest at a wider section of the path, a small plateau that offered enough space for the wagons and horses to stand comfortably. I was helping Vera inventory our medical supplies. We were running low on certain herbs, and she was teaching me which mountain plants could substitute when Finn came running from the forward scout position. "Riders approaching," he called out, his voice tight with tension. "At least a dozen. They're carrying the ironwood banner." The effect on the camp was immediate. Guards reached for weapons, drivers moved to protect the wagons, and everyone looked to Darius. He stood at the plateau's edge, perfectly still, watching the approaching group with those unsettling eyes. "Stay near the wagons," Vera told me quietly, her hand on my arm. "Don't speak unless directly addressed, and don't make eye contact with any of them. The Ironwood Pack is complicated." Complicated how? They believe these territories belong to them by ancient right. They don't acknowledge Darius's authority here, which makes every encounter a potential conflict. My heart hammered against my ribs as the riders crested the rise. They were impressive and terrifying, larger than Darius's guards, mounted on horses that looked barely tamed, wearing furs and leather that spoke of lives lived in constant battle. At their head rode a man who radiated aggression like heat from a forge. He had dark red hair pulled back in braids, a scar running from his temple to his jaw, and eyes that swept over our company with barely concealed contempt. "Darius," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Still pretending you have authority in these mountains?" "Ronan." Darius's tone was perfectly neutral. "Still pretending you don't answer to the same laws as everyone else?" Ronan dismounted with aggressive grace, his men following suit. They outnumbered Darius's guards significantly, and the threat in that was impossible to miss. "Laws. The only law in these mountains is strength. And you're looking rather weak these days, Alpha King." The title was mocking, meant to insult. I saw several of Darius's guards tense, hands moving toward weapons, but Darius himself remained utterly calm. "If you've come to test that theory, Ronan, please proceed. I could use the entertainment." His smile was cold, dangerous. "Though I should warn you, the last 3 who challenged me are still recovering. Or haven't you heard?" Ronan's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, his gaze swept across the camp and landed on me. I'd tried to make myself inconspicuous near the wagon, but my pale hair caught the sunlight, marking me as different from everyone else present. "What's this?" He moved toward me with predatory focus, and I fought every instinct that screamed at me to run. "You're keeping humans now, Darius? How domestic of you." She's under my protection, Darius said, and something in his voice made even Ronan pause. Which means she's untouchable. Is she now? Ronan circled me slowly, studying me like I was a curious specimen. And what exactly is a fragile little human doing traveling with the Alpha King? Are you starting a collection of pets? The insult was meant for Darius, but it struck me harder. Pet. Property. Something to be owned and controlled. The same thing I'd run from in my village, just wearing different fur. I'm a healer, I said, lifting my chin to meet Ronan's eyes despite Vera's warning. I treat his guard's injuries. Ronan's eyebrows rose. It speaks. And with some fire, too. He leaned closer, and I could smell pine and smoke and something metallic. Tell me, little healer, what does Darius offer you in exchange for your services? Protection? Food? His voice dropped lower, more insinuating. Warmer comforts? That's enough. Darius's voice cut through the air like a blade. He hadn't moved, but suddenly the space felt charged with violence barely contained. State your business, Ronan, or move on. I don't have time for your posturing. For a moment I thought Ronan would push further. The tension stretched thin as wire, and I saw his men shifting into positions that looked suspiciously like attack formations, but then Ronan laughed, stepping back from me with exaggerated courtesy. No business today, Alpha King, just ensuring you understand that these mountains don't belong to you, no matter how many royal proclamations you carry. He mounted his horse in one fluid motion. But I'll remember this. A human healer traveling under your protection. How interesting. They rode away, but the threat lingered long after they disappeared down the mountain path. Move out, Darius ordered immediately. We don't stop again until we're through the passes. Finn, double the rear guard. No one approaches without challenge. As the camp mobilized with urgent efficiency, Vera pulled me toward the wagon. That was foolish, she hissed. I told you not to speak. He was insulting all of us. He was testing Darius, not you. Now Ronan knows you exist, knows you're important enough for the king to defend publicly. You've made yourself a target. The weight of that settled in my stomach like a stone. I didn't think, no, you didn't. That's the problem. But her expression softened slightly. Though I'll admit, you've got spine. Most humans would have cowered. The rest of the day's travel was tense. Every guard on high alert. Weapons within easy reach. We moved faster than was probably wise on the treacherous mountain paths. But no one questioned Darius's order. When we finally descended below the snow line as evening approached, I felt the collective relief ripple through the company. We made camp in a sheltered valley, surrounded by steep rock walls that offered natural protection. The fires were built larger than usual, the guard rotations more frequent. I treated the day's injuries with hands that still trembled slightly from the afternoon's confrontation, and tried not to notice how often the guards glanced toward the mountain passes we'd left behind. Marin. I looked up from rewrapping Finn's arm to find Darius standing at the edge of the firelight. It was the first time he'd addressed me directly since that initial night, and everyone around the fire went quiet. Yes, Your Majesty, walk with me. It wasn't a request. I finished tying off the bandage, then stood, very aware of every eye following us as I joined him. He led me away from the fires, toward the edge of camp where 2 guards stood watch. They nodded to Darius and deliberately looked away, giving us privacy. The night air was cold, but no longer brutal. Above us, stars scattered across the sky in unfamiliar patterns, constellations I'd never learned the names of. What you did today was dangerous, Darius said without preamble. I know. Vera already lectured me. Vera doesn't understand the full scope of what you've done. He turned to face me, and in the darkness, his eyes caught the starlight, glowing faintly. Ronan is ambitious and violent. He's been looking for weakness to exploit. Reasons to challenge my authority. By defending you publicly, I've given him leverage. Guilt twisted in my chest. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause problems. I'm not finished. His voice was calm but firm. Ronan now believes you're important to me, which makes you a potential target. He'll wonder why a human healer matters enough for me to claim publicly. And he'll test that claim however he can. What do you want me to do? Be more careful. Don't engage with challenges that aren't yours to face. And understand that every action you take reflects on me and my authority here. He paused. But I also want you to know that my protection of you today wasn't merely strategic. My breath caught. What was it then? You showed courage speaking up when insulted. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. You remind me that humans aren't all fragile, fearful creatures. Some have steel in their spines. I spent 22 years being fragile and fearful, I said quietly. It didn't protect me. Maybe courage won't either, but at least it feels like living. He studied me for a long moment, and I couldn't read his expression. You're different from what I expected when I found you hiding in my wagon. What did you expect? Someone running from pain, looking for someone else to save them. He turned back toward the stars. Instead, I found someone running toward possibility, even if that possibility included death. That's rare. We stood in silence for a while, and I felt something shift between us. A recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement that we'd both chosen paths that most would call insane. We'll reach my court in 3 days, Darius said finally. You'll need to decide what you want your life to look like there. I can offer you a position with Vera, training properly as a healer. You'd have protection, purpose, and independence, but you need to understand what you'd be accepting. What do you mean? My court isn't human, Marin. We don't follow human customs or human laws. You'd be living among wolves, among people who can shift between forms, who have instincts and hierarchies you don't understand yet. It would be dangerous, unpredictable, and nothing like the life you knew. The life I knew was killing me slowly, I said. At least this danger is honest. He turned to look at me fully, and something in his expression made my heart race. Then welcome to the pack, Marin. May you survive it. As we walked back toward the fires, I realized that sometime in the past 4 days, I'd stopped thinking of these people as kidnappers or threats. They'd become something else, companions, maybe even the beginning of family. And Darius, the Alpha King who should have terrified me, had become someone I wanted to understand, to prove myself to stand beside rather than behind. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That night, as I settled into my bedroll, I heard the wolves calling again, that long, mournful sound that had once frightened me. Now I understood it differently. They weren't crying out in pain or loneliness. They were calling to each other, affirming their bonds, reminding themselves and the world that they belonged to something larger than themselves. And somehow, impossibly, I was beginning to belong too. The northern court appeared on the horizon at dawn on the 8th day of travel, and it stole my breath. It wasn't a castle in the traditional sense. No towering stone walls or delicate spires reaching toward heaven. Instead, it was built into the mountainside itself, a sprawling complex of wood and stone that seemed to grow organically from the rock. Massive timber beams formed structures that flowed into natural cave openings, creating spaces that belonged equally to civilization and wilderness. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and I could see people moving along wooden walkways that connected different levels of the compound. Home, Finn said beside me, grinning. His arm had healed well under my care, and he'd appointed himself my unofficial guide during the journey. What do you think? It's not what I expected. What did you expect? Bones and darkness? He laughed. We're wolves, not monsters. Well, mostly. As we drew closer, more details emerged. There were training grounds where fighters sparred with brutal efficiency, gardens that somehow flourished despite the northern climate, workshops where smiths and craftspeople plied their trades. Children, actual children, ran between buildings, their laughter carrying on the wind. It looked like a community, a real place where people built lives rather than just survived. The procession was met with cheers and greetings. People emerged from buildings to welcome the returning guards, to embrace loved ones, to help unload supplies. I stayed close to the wagon, suddenly uncertain of my place in all this celebration. Marin. Darius appeared beside me, and I startled slightly. I'd been so absorbed in watching the reunion that I hadn't noticed his approach. Come, I'll show you where you'll be staying. He led me through the compound, up wooden stairs carved into the rock face, along pathways that offered breathtaking views of the valley below. People stared as we passed, curious, assessing, some openly hostile. A human in their midst was clearly unusual, and Darius's personal escort made it clear I was under his direct protection. We stopped at a small building perched on a quieter level, separated slightly from the main residential areas. Inside was a single room with a bed, a fireplace, a small table and chairs, and a window that overlooked the forest. It was simple but clean, and more importantly, it was mine. Vera's quarters are 2 doors down, Darius explained. You'll work with her, learn from her, and earn your place here. The pack will test you. Expect challenges, questions, doubt. Prove yourself valuable, and they'll accept you. Fail, and he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I understand. Do you? He studied me with those unsettling eyes. You've been traveling with a small group for just over a week. There are 300 people in this court, Maren. 300 wolves with their own hierarchies, loyalties, and prejudices. Some will resent you for being human. Others will resent you for having my attention. And Ronan's encounter means word will spread. You're marked now, whether you want to be or not. Are you trying to scare me? I'm trying to prepare you. He moved toward the door, then paused. There's a gathering tonight in the main hall. A welcome feast for the returning guards. You should attend. Should I? It would show strength. Show that you're not hiding, not ashamed of your place here. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. And it would please me to see you there. He left before I could respond, and I stood alone in my new room, my heart racing from that last statement. It would please me. Not an order, but something more personal, more complicated. I spent the afternoon with Vera, who showed me her healing quarters, a larger space filled with herbs, medicines, surgical tools, and texts written in languages I couldn't read. She was methodical in her instruction, testing my knowledge, correcting my techniques, explaining the differences between treating humans and treating wolves. We heal faster, she explained, but we're also more susceptible to silver poisoning, certain plant toxins, and infections from other supernatural creatures. You'll need to learn all of this if you want to be useful here. I will. She looked at me appraisingly. You're determined. I'll give you that. Most humans would have broken by now. The journey alone should have been too much, but you kept working, kept proving yourself. That matters here. Finn said the pack will test me. They will. Expect challenges, both subtle and direct. Some will try to intimidate you, others to seduce you, still others to trip you up with questions you can't answer. Stay honest, stay humble, but don't be weak. Weakness invites cruelty. As evening approached, I returned to my room to prepare for the feast. I had only the clothes Vera had given me for travel, but I braided my pale hair carefully, washed my face in the basin, and tried to look like someone who belonged among wolves. The main hall was enormous, carved partially from a natural cave, and extended with massive timber construction. Long tables filled the space, already crowded with people eating, drinking, and celebrating the successful journey. The noise was overwhelming. Laughter, arguments, the clatter of dishes, snatches of song in that fluid language I was learning to recognize. I hesitated at the entrance, suddenly aware of how different I looked, how out of place I was. There you are. Finn appeared at my elbow, grinning. Come on, you're sitting with us. He guided me to a table where Garrett and several other guards I'd treated sat. They made space for me immediately, and someone pushed a plate of food into my hands. Roasted meat, root vegetables, bread that was still warm. The acceptance was casual, unspoken, but real. To Maren, Garrett said, raising his cup. The only healer who's made me admit I was actually injured. The others laughed and raised their cups too, and I felt warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the fire. As the evening progressed, I began to relax. People asked me questions, where I was from, how I'd learned healing, what I thought of the North. I answered honestly, and they seemed to appreciate the directness. Some were clearly testing me, looking for weakness or deception, but I met their challenges with calm truth. Then I felt him watching me. I looked up to find Darius at the head table, elevated slightly on a platform that marked his status. He was surrounded by advisors and high-ranking pack members, but his attention was on me. Our eyes met across the crowded hall, and something passed between us, recognition, connection, a wordless conversation that made my breath catch. Someone at his table spoke to him, breaking the moment, and he turned away. But I felt the ghost of that gaze for the rest of the night. "He's interested," Garrett said quietly beside me. "What?" "The king. He doesn't look at people like that unless they matter." He took a long drink. "Be careful, Marin. That kind of attention can be dangerous." "I'm not looking for that kind of attention. Doesn't matter if you're looking for it or not. It's found you anyway." The feast continued late into the night, but I slipped away earlier than most, overwhelmed by the noise and the constant attention. Outside, the air was cold and clean, and I breathed deeply, trying to settle my racing thoughts. Running away already? I spun to find Ronan leaning against the wall near the entrance, a cup in his hand and a dangerous smile on his face. My heart lurched into my throat. "Just getting air," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Of course." He pushed off the wall, moving closer. "Tell me, little healer, how does it feel to be Darius's new pet project?" "I'm not anyone's pet." "No? Then what are you?" "A healer, you said. But I think you're more than that. I think you're a test. Darius seeing if he can domesticate himself, bring something soft and human into his world without destroying it." He circled me slowly. "I wonder how long you'll last." "Long enough to prove you wrong," he laughed, genuinely amused. "There's that fire again. I like it. Makes me understand why he's kept you." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "But understand something, girl. Darius may be Alpha King, but his protection only extends so far. There are places in these mountains where his word means nothing, and if you ever find yourself in one of those places..." He let the threat hang unfinished. "Ronan." Darius's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. He emerged from the hall, and the temperature seemed to drop further. "You're not welcome in my court uninvited." "I was invited. Your celebration is open to all pack leaders, or have you forgotten tradition?" Ronan smiled, unrepentant. "I was just getting to know your interesting new acquisition." "She's not an acquisition. She's under my protection, which you're currently violating." Darius moved to stand beside me, and I felt the barely leashed violence radiating from him. "Leave. Now. Before I forget we're supposed to maintain peace." For a heartbeat, I thought Ronan would challenge him. The air crackled with tension, two alpha predators facing off over territory and pride. But then Ronan stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "Peace, Alpha King. I'm going." He looked at me once more. "Enjoy your safety while it lasts, little healer." He disappeared into the darkness, and I released a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Are you hurt?" Darius asked, his hand on my arm, checking me over with clinical efficiency. "I'm fine. He just talked." Ronan doesn't just talk. Every word is a weapon. He studied my face in the dim light spilling from the hall. "You need to understand something, Marin. There are people who will use you to get to me, who will see you as a weakness they can exploit. I can't protect you from everything, especially if you keep walking into danger alone." I just stepped outside for air. "In a place you don't know, full of people you don't understand, without telling anyone where you were going." His frustration was evident. "That stops now. You want independence? Earn it by being smart, not reckless." His words stung because they were true. I'd been operating on instinct and stubbornness, not strategy. "You're right. I'm sorry." Some of the tension left his shoulders. "I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to keep you alive long enough to actually build a life here." "Why?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "Why does it matter so much to you?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching my face. "Because when I found you in that wagon, terrified but defiant, running from a fate worse than death, I saw something I recognized. Someone who refused to be broken by a world that wanted them small and obedient. Someone who chose danger and possibility over safe misery. That's what you saw in me? That's what I see in you still." He reached out, almost touching my face, then dropped his hand. "You don't belong in a cage, Marin. Neither do I. Maybe that's why your presence here feels right." My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Darius, go get some rest," he said, stepping back, breaking the moment. "Tomorrow, Vera will continue your training. And Marin, thank you For what? For choosing to stay. For not running when things got difficult. For being, he paused, searching for words. For being exactly who you are. He left me there in the cold darkness, my mind spinning, my heart full of emotions I couldn't name. The following weeks blurred together in a rhythm of work and learning. I trained with Vera, absorbing everything she taught me about healing wolves, about the unique challenges of treating supernatural injuries, about the politics and hierarchies that governed the court. I treated injuries, delivered a baby when one of the pack members went into early labor, even helped set a bone when a young wolf broke his leg during training. Slowly, grudgingly, the pack began to accept me. Not all of them. There were still those who saw me as an outsider, a human contamination in their pure world. But enough of them respected my skill and my determination that I found my place, carved out a small corner of belonging in this wild northern court. And through it all, I felt Darius watching. Not constantly, not oppressively, but present. He'd appear during my training sessions, observing quietly. He'd ask Vera about my progress. He'd nod to me when we passed in the corridors, a small acknowledgement that somehow meant everything. 3 months after my arrival, on a night when snow fell soft and silent over the mountains, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Darius standing there, snowflakes catching in his dark hair, his eyes reflecting the lamplight from my room. "Walk with me?" he asked. I grabbed my cloak without hesitation. He led me along the walkways, up to the highest point of the compound, where a platform jutted out over the valley. The view was breathtaking, mountains and forest stretching endlessly under a sky full of stars, snow turning the world silver and strange. "I received word today," Darius said. "Your former village sent an inquiry through official channels. They want to know if we've seen a girl matching your description. Edmund Thorne is still looking for his runaway bride." Fear clenched in my stomach. "What did you tell them?" "That we don't track every traveler who passes through our territory." He turned to face me. "But they're persistent. Eventually, they may send someone to search personally. Should I leave? Go somewhere else where they won't find me?" "Is that what you want?" I looked out at the wild, beautiful landscape, thought about the life I'd built here, the people who'd become family, the work that gave me purpose. "No." "Then stay. But understand what that means." He moved closer. "If they come for you, if Edmund tries to reclaim what he thinks he owns, it will cause conflict. Human law versus pack law. Your former community versus mine. I won't let that happen. You'll let me handle it." His voice was firm. "This is my territory, my court, my authority. And you, Marin." He reached out, finally completing that gesture from months ago, his hand cupping my face gently. "You're mine to protect." "Yours?" My voice came out barely a whisper. "If you want to be. No obligation, no ownership. But if you choose to stay, if you choose this life, choose me, then I will defend that choice with everything I have." I leaned into his touch, my hand covering his. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose the life I'm building here." His smile was like sunrise, gradual, transforming, full of warmth that I'd never seen before. "Then welcome home, Marin, truly home." He kissed me then, soft and careful, like I was something precious he'd been afraid to break. And for the first time since I'd climbed into that wagon so many miles and lifetimes ago, I felt completely, utterly safe. Not because someone else was protecting me, but because I'd become strong enough to protect myself, brave enough to claim my own happiness, and wise enough to know the difference between imprisonment and belonging. The wolves howled in the valley below, calling to the moon, calling to each other, calling to something wild and free that lived in all of us, and I howled with them, my voice joining theirs, marking my place in this pack, in this life, in this beautiful, dangerous world I'd chosen. I was no longer the girl who hid in a wagon to escape her fate. I was Marin, healer of the Northern Court, chosen companion of the Alpha King, and finally, blessedly, myself. The snow fell, the wolves sang, and somewhere far behind me, a wedding dress hung abandoned in an empty room, a ghost of a life I'd had the courage to refuse. And I had never been more grateful for that reckless, terrified, brave choice that brought me here, home.